Like, you live in the building and you die in the building.
So just like you have some people right now who've never left their hometown, maybe in the future you've got people who've never left their home building. This is their community.
Mom, I've had it with here. I want us to do something new. I'm going to block 5.
Hello and welcome to Entropy Rising, where we talk about science and futurism. I'm your host, Jacob, and as always, I am joined with my wonderful co-host, Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful today, Jake. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I know you're doing well because you're about to hop on a plane and jet off to Mexico, right?
To New York, and then taking a boat from New York to Mexico.
Okay, well, that sounds wonderful. We'll definitely talk about that in the post-episode discussion, which we post for free on Patreon if anyone's interested.
Yeah.
But moving away from the wonderful sunny skies of Mexico, we are actually going to be talking about quite an interesting topic today. It's this idea of planet-wide cities that literally take up the entire surface area of a planet, like what we see in Star Wars with Coruscant, right?
Yeah. Coruscant, I think, would definitely be the most relatable example of this. A lot of people don't even know that Coruscant is an ecumenopolis. They just see it as, a giant city, but it is actually a city that spans the entirety of that planet. But yeah, we will be talking about ecumenopolis today, just planet-wide spanning city.
Absolutely. Coruscant, of course, being one of the most popular depictions of that we see in science fiction, because Star Wars is just an insanely popular franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Although not the first. I know the first one that I can think of, or that I was able to find a reference for, is Trantor. I read it in the Foundation series, but I think Isaac Asimov expanded upon his interstellar empire, and Trantor has served as the hub of his galactic empire for a lot of his different books.
Yeah. That's awesome. I haven't read the series, but I know that it's prevalent in just a whole bunch of different sci-fi films and movies.
Absolutely. So Trantor was an interesting one. I don't know much about Coruscant. I don't know. I'm just never been as heavily involved in the Star Wars lore.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there are statistics for the population of Coruscant or how they get their food and everything. But Trantor, we do have numbers for. So for Trantor, again, it's depicted as this ecumenopolis, but some science fiction authors, and actually Isaac Asimov was really good with a lot of his science fiction with getting numbers right. But he did struggle with this regard, which a lot of science fiction authors do. His city-spanning planet had a population of 40 billion people, even though it was depicted as, mile-high skyscrapers, not
Right.
even an inch of ground available. And it was depicted as having 40 extra planets that served just to produce the food for this population of 40 billion, which is hilariously small.
It is, because you have to think we have one planet. We have, what is it, 7 billion?
8 billion, I think, now.
We have 8 billion people living on it, and the planet is still providing food for those 8 billion people that are living on it.
And we're not doing anything too fancy. Yeah, we have industrial agriculture, but it's not like we're doing vertical farming or, really maximizing our food production. There's still areas of nature reserves. We could fit a lot more people on our planet.
Yeah, we probably could fit close, maybe like 25 billion.
Yeah, I think so, but especially when we start getting into complex ideas like vertical farming, I think we can go much further than that, honestly.
Yeah, we absolutely could.
I mean, actually, just doing some math, so when we're thinking about these planet-sized cities, they're typically depicted fairly dystopian in most science fiction.
Well, it depends on what perspective you're looking at, right? Because if you're looking at the perspective of somebody who spends a lot of time towards the bottom of the cities, it'll look dystopian.
Yeah, that's like the hive worlds from Warhammer 40K. The bottoms of those cities are depicted as crime-ridden and just absolutely awful.
Yeah, while up in the top, they have floating cars. They fly from top of building to top of building. They never even have to experience the disgusting, poor people that live in the bottom who struggle to survive. So for them, it's a utopian society, right? As long as you have status or money, or your family had that and you were grandfathered into it. But if you're living in the bottom of the city, it's like every day is a fight for survival.
Yeah, at least in the 40K universe. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that in real life, but 40K is depicted like that.
Yes.
I think Trantor was also depicted like that. The lower areas were full of crime. If I'm not mistaken, Coruscant from Star. Yep, same situation as you go down. And that makes sense. There is, like you said, there's that social stratification already in cities like New York and any major city. If you have a top floor apartment, it's a status symbol.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that we're going to see that depiction of social stratification of not only does it matter where you live in the city, whether you live in a more ideal area, like geographically, but it's also going to depend where you live altitude wise too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like you have to think. I guess it does make sense in the regard of you being a writer, right? Like, there's going to be poor and rich people always, and where are the poor people going to go? They're not going to go in the nice upscaling areas. They're going to be on the floor. The reason why I say that is because you said it doesn't have to be like that in real life. I just don't know how we'll get around that.
Yeah, I hate to say that there's always going to be, because you never know what society is going to look like in a couple thousand years. I do tend to be optimistic and think that a lot of problems will be solved, but I try not to let that go too far and think that, oh, we'll have solved inequality and people will live perfectly. No, there probably will be some social stratification, and I do think there's going to be poorer areas, and you're probably right. Those areas are typically going to be lower in altitude than the richer areas, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be as bad as it's depicted, especially in like 40K, which is just like
Well, yeah, I mean, they're just killing each other for fun in 40K.
Oh yeah, 40K is a wild. I've never played the tabletop, but I do love the lore.
Yeah,
it's a wild. I don't even think the Wild West is the right word for it. It's a very not great society in general.
No, cool though.
It is fascinating. I do think it's really cool. But for these cities, tying back into the population numbers, what we were saying, I mentioned Trantor had a population of 40 billion. And considering that they had mile-tall skyscrapers, 40 billion people, that would be insane. Each person would have a mansion's worth of space, even accounting for industry and food growth and work and school. There would be so much empty space. That city would feel absolutely empty with only 40 billion inhabitants.
Yeah.
It would just, and it's funny because in the books it was described as being, squalid and cramped conditions, but it's the opposite of that, considering how the planet was described.
When did he write that book? Do you know?
He wrote it in the 50s, 1950s.
Yeah, that would make sense because we've come out with a lot, and we've actually seen what modernization and the creation of cities and the resourcefulness that people can have with that space, which just makes me feel like he didn't quite understand like what living in a city, what that lifestyle would actually be like, and how many people you can stuff into a square mile.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's normal. He actually wrote another book called Caves of Steel that also took place not in planet-wide cities per se, but huge major cities. It takes place in New York City, which by this point in time had grown to encompass all of New Jersey. And it's a dome city. And he described that one city as having a population, or I think the world at that point had a population of like 8 billion, which is where we're already at. So, yeah. And I do think especially if you go and you read older science fiction, population numbers tend to be wildly underestimated. And I think that's because we've had a lot of breakthroughs in farming and agriculture that allowed us to comfortably supply food for a larger growing population. But just to put the population scale into perspective here, when we're talking about building out an ecumenopolis, like actually paving the entire planet, excluding the oceans and the poles, and making it a city. If we were to do that at about 5,000 people per square kilometer, which is a little more dense than your average mid-sized city, it's a little denser than where we live, you're still going to have about 500 billion people. Now, if you step that up to New York City density, which is about 10,000 people per square kilometer, you're going to have a population of 1.33 trillion. And scaling that up even further to the densest populated city we have on Earth, you can now have a population of 6.64 trillion people in your planet-sized city.
Now, just to reiterate, that would not be fun.
No, that'd be fine. You would have a ton of space, actually. Well, it depends. Okay, it depends how it's depicted, right? So
if the whole world was as populated as the densest populated city on Earth?
Yes, but, it's going off of square area, not cubic area. So, it's talking about people per square foot, not people per volume. When we're talking about these cities, these massive ecumenopolises, we really need to start thinking in terms of volume that people occupy, because it's a three-dimensional structure. If you were to build a planet-wide city with 2-mile large buildings, let's say that you dig down a mile and you build up a mile, you could comfortably support well over a quadrillion people while still giving them a 2,000 square foot living area and accounting for all of the space it takes for agriculture and industry. So it depends how big we're building these. And when I say that we're going to be doing it at 50,000 people per square kilometer, yes, that's a lot, but it doesn't have to be as squalid in conditions as some of these cities are in real life, because like I said, something like Trantor is depicted as having mile-large skyscrapers over the entire city.
I see. So you're like talking about the amount of space that they would take up, not just the population of the flat earth of the city at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you were to put them all on one level, yeah, they'd be packed in like sardines, shoulder to shoulder. But when you're talking about a building that has 200 levels, which is about what a 2 mile or 2 kilometer large tall building would have, then people have a ton of space, actually.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know why I thought of it as a flat level, because that's what a city is designed to do. It's designed to make population storage vertical.
Exactly.
Right? Man, it's just like thinking about what would that elevator ride look like?
Well, elevators, I don't think are going to be so. I was doing some research into this, and there's an interesting paradox with elevators. This is a bit of a tangent, but elevators allow you to build taller, but they have a limit, because the amount of elevators you need actually don't linearly increase with the size of the building. If you have, let's say, a 100-story building, and let's say that has 8 elevators, right? Those elevators all take up a fixed amount of volume. An elevator shaft takes up some room.
Mm-hmm.
If you decide to double the size of that building, you might think you would need to double your elevator shafts, but you don't. You actually need to increase them a lot more, because not only can you now support more people in the building, double the size of the building, double the amount of people in the building, right? That part makes sense. But you've also increased the average length that each person needs to spend on the elevator to get where they want to go. So you can't just double the elevators. You actually need to increase them even more than that. So you might need 4 times the elevators if you double the size of your building. And at a certain point, you end up with more elevator shafts than actual living space. So like making the building bigger doesn't get you any more living space. So elevators, so elevators cannot be what we use for 2 mile large buildings. We would really need something more kind of like vertical trains.
Oh man, that sounds nauseating. Really, what we need is the flying cars.
Oh yeah, flying cars. I guess there's a reason
and you can just park in your garage, your sky garage.
So even when we have super complex packed cities, we're still gonna have urban sprawl with flying cars now. That's just gonna be we're never getting away from car dependence in the United States.
No, okay, so we have to think about
trains can never happen here.
we have to think about, right, just trying to get to any kind of public transportation hub, unless the train is literally attached to the building, right? It sounds awful. Like imagine your morning rush, except it's 1 billion people, and it's 1/8 of how many people live on the planet right now, and they're all like, you can almost see them all coming out of their houses.
I don't know, because I think you're going to have these buildings become basically communities in and of themselves. One building might be where you live and work and drop your kids off for school.
That would be a much better idea and a great solution. Like each building is its own city in itself, its own hub.
I would say like a neighborhood or a community, and then you might have a vertical transportation built into each building that's more akin to like a vertical train, and then you probably have horizontal transportation. So maybe there is a set floor or a set height of like, all right, you always go to floor, 120, that's going to be your mid-level or high-level transportation connection. And then if you go to floor 80, that's another lower level transport that connects buildings. And these could also have bridgeways too, where you can walk from building to building.
I mean, honestly, these, when I think of buildings like this, it's like transcending even what I thought of ecumenopolis to be. They're massive cities, but made up of smaller buildings in my mind. They don't have to be. They could be your vision, but this is more of like a hyperacropolis. Like this is a building that it's like a planet of its own, like within itself that spans into space. But your idea of the way that works actually works for me mentally as well. They could have several train or rail systems that run through the building and run you up to your apartment. And, it just drops people off at their stops. But these floors are housing hundreds or thousands of people.
Yeah, very probably a 2 mile large building, depending on like obviously the square footage that it takes up on the ground, can easily support tens of thousands of people. So yeah, I mean, you got to think some of these buildings have a larger population than many smaller towns have right now. Your community might be your building, and you might live, work, go to school, everything in your one building.
You would have to.
Yeah.
To just support that monster. Like you live in the building and you die in the building.
So just like you have some people right now who've never left their hometown, maybe in the future you've got people who've never left their home building. This is their community.
Mom, I've had it with here. I want to do something new. I'm going to block 5.
Sounds rather dystopian, but I think it could. I think it could be quite nice. I don't know. I guess in my mind, though, I love the idea of a walkable community. I know I've complained to you no ends at how much I wish the United States was more walkable. So for me, this sounds kind of nice.
It doesn't get more walkable than that.
Than a building? Yeah, no.
Man, I just might like. What happens if there's a fire?
Well,
you walking down 45,000 flights of stairs.
So modern buildings are actually already built around this idea that you don't abandon them during a fire. Buildings are designed to handle fire. They have fire bunkers. A lot of taller skyscrapers already have this idea of how to handle fires.
So cool. What?
So yeah, when there's a fire, instead of trying to run down the stairs, you go to your fire bunker. It seals it off. All the floors are segregated with different levels of fire protection. And then you just wait it out.
Your engineering is showing.
Yeah. Fire codes are really cool. You should look up your local fire codes.
Yeah,
also,
fire codes are really cool.
They are. It's also why you see a lot of mid-rise buildings here, the 3 or 4 level story buildings here. That has to do with fire codes and building codes as well.
That is awesome, though. And something that I didn't know. God, I learn something every day. Really do.
But yeah, no, you're not wrong. So fire, of course, and building is always a humongous concern. And that's not anything new. If you go to modern buildings, they are engineered around fire safety because fires spread upward a lot faster than they spread outward. So when you build upward, you are much more prone to fires and also smoke inhalation and risk like that. And that's why we see things like automatically closing fire doors and fire bunkers being built into these taller buildings. But in addition, though, also natural disasters in general become a little scarier. I mean, think about earthquakes when you're in, a 2-mile tall building. Or even if these are the safest buildings in the world, if one does fail in some way, you could see death tolls climb tens of thousands very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so let's assume that these buildings don't just span up miles, but they also are rooted miles, like as also another structure into the ground. Like you're saying, an earthquake would probably be the most detrimental because there's no way that the strength of that building will stop a tectonic shift.
No.
And then it's pretty much just going to suck the building down and cut it in half and then collapse it.
Hopefully it's built so it doesn't do that. But yeah, if it did collapse, you could potentially, if it didn't affect any other buildings, just losing one building could, again, be like losing a mid-sized U.S. town.
Well, you also have to think this is a building that's a mile long.
Exactly, yeah.
So when it falls,
it's going to affect things
taking a
around
mile with it.
Yeah. Well, then you've also got, another one is if you're building down, flooding becomes a concern. Because if you're building down, you're going to be below the water table. So you're always going to be pumping water out. So, a natural disaster could just be as simple as a power outage that causes your pumps to fail.
It definitely could be. Yeah. I mean, when I think of an ecumenopolis, especially one of this size, I feel like we've already, like we talked about in our Kardashev scale episode, we've mastered the nature of our planet.
I think so.
For the most part.
You're well past type 1 at this point. You have to be if you're talking about a planet-sized city. And also not just because of, you're literally paving the whole planet. I think that makes you type 1 by definition. But in order to build these cities, you need a lot of energy. Energy is one of the biggest limiting factors on if we can do this. Right now, one of the things that limit our ability to produce food is how much energy is available and how much does that energy cost. That's why vertical farming isn't a successful industry right now. Land is cheap and the energy on that land is free because it comes from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
You want to farm vertically, what you would need to do if you had this type of city, unless you were getting your food from space, which I don't think you probably would. I think farming in space and importing that to the ground has a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So presumably you're doing vertical farming. And the thing that dictates that is just energy. Do you have a cheap energy source like nuclear fusion? Because once you go to vertical farming, you have to supply all of the energy for all of those floors. It's not free anymore.
Yeah, so you're essentially filling giant organic batteries, which is our food, because that's just an energy storage source at the end of the day. It definitely would be quite an undertaking. We might, because we're an ecumenopolis that's doing all this drilling, be able to harness more geothermal energy, to be able to use, and of course, hopefully by this point we have some kind of beginning of a Dyson sphere or some kind of mining operation where we can harness a lot more power, but it still might not be enough. Yeah, fusion absolutely would be enough for us to use. It's just how many fusion reactors do you think we would have to have? Not that it's a bad thing. I'm just curious now.
Each building could potentially have its own. You could have a distributed fusion grid. It just depends, right? If we get cheap, small fusion reactors that are safe, you might build one per building. If they're less safe, or if we can't build them small, because fusion does tend to be something that becomes more efficient as you have larger and larger reactors. That's just kind of the name of the game with fusion. Kind of one of the reasons we've been struggling with it right now. then yeah, you might end up having a giant fusion reactor that powers like a bunch of local buildings. But yeah, that just is going to depend on the fusion technology you have available.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
for the energy output, I should have done some research on that. I actually don't know, but it would be a lot.
Thinking about how many kilowatts our cities consume right now, and that's without vertical agriculture. I mean, I can't put a number on it either, and I don't want to throw out a wrong number, but it would be quite literally the most that our planet could consume.
Yeah, somewhere between mind-boggling and utterly mind-boggling. So that does bring me to one of the biggest limitations with ecumenopolis is it's not necessarily the energy that you can produce, because you can always produce more energy to an extent. You can go and build a Dyson swarm, you can beam that energy in, you can harvest hydrogen from Jupiter and transport that to the planet for nuclear fusion. I'm not going to say we can make unlimited power, but for all intents and purposes, you can make unlimited power. However, what you can't do is get rid of unlimited heat. Heat generation is going to be the number one thing that limits how big your ecumenopolis can be. You can build a city that can support over a quadrillion people in terms of volume. However, that would absolutely cook your planet. And just to put this into perspective, each human body gives off about 100 watts of thermal energy.
Mm.
If you were to try to support a population of somewhere between 5 and 17 trillion people, just the body heat of those people, not the energy needed for agriculture, not the energy needed to sustain their life, just their body heat would raise the planet's temperature by 1 degree.
Oh my God.
Which would be about equivalent to doubling the current CO2 in the atmosphere.
That is insane.
So a quadrillion people on the planet, even if you had 100% efficiency in terms of everything needed to support those people, there wasn't a joule of waste heat produced. The only waste heat was their body temperature. That would absolutely roast your planet. Your planet would be hotter than Venus just from body heat.
Yeah, there would have to be some kind of heat dissipation built into the city. I mean, the body heat, you wouldn't be able to really do anything about.
Well, the issue is where are you dissipating that heat? Even if you get it out of the buildings, it just goes into the atmosphere. The whole planet heats up.
But what if we could jet it into space?
Yeah, that is the option that you have. That's basically the only option.
We harvest comets and we water cool underneath the planets like a computer.
Oh my God.
And then we jettison the water into space.
So you do have a few options. There is the idea of, well, first of all, the first thing you're probably going to do that's the easiest is build a solar shade. If you build it out of glass, that'll let you filter out infrared radiation. That'll allow all the visible wavelengths. IR light doesn't really do anything for our planet except heat it up. So if you've got abundant heat already, go ahead and filter out the IR light coming from the sun. You could also filter out some of the other wavelengths of light too, especially if most people aren't even seeing the sky. You could reduce the total sunlight hitting the planet to try to keep it from overheating. But that doesn't really get rid of the waste heat generated. That just prevents extra heat from coming in from the sun. And like I said, with a quadrillion people, even if you completely blocked off the sun, you're still going to cook your planet. Getting heat off planet is tricky because most of the ways that you would try to transport heat away from the planet generate more heat in the process. Like trying to beam the heat off with like a microwave laser, that releases more waste heat than it transmits through the microwave beam.
Right.
There's the idea of a thermal bullet, which is basically a giant railgun where you take a projectile, you dump all your waste heat into it until it's basically just short of liquid, and then you literally catapult it in space, and it carries all that thermal energy away.
How are you harvesting the waste heat?
It just heat sinks the heat pumps and, take it, pump it around, concentrate it into one area. The issue, of course, with the thermal bullet is however you're firing that thing into space is generating heat. So it's questionable whether you would be getting rid of more heat than you're generating trying to launch that projectile. And even if you are, you're going to need to launch a lot of mass off the planet.
A lot of times.
Yes.
Like multiple times a day, launching bus-sized projectiles.
Bus-sized projectiles, you'd probably need to be firing them like a machine gun, and you would probably need thousands of these cannons doing that. The scale.
I mean, people would see us as a war machine.
Yeah, for real. I mean, hey, if you can find somebody you don't like, then maybe you can make use of these projectiles.
Just drive by.
Yeah, 2 birds with 1 stone. Get rid of your waste heat and nuke someone a couple light years away.
Oh my God.
You could try to radiate the heat away from the planet in terms of like if you've got space elevators, especially. Maybe you can incorporate some type of almost like what you were saying, like water loop into those where you pump the heat in, transport it up to space and let it radiate away. Again, just the issue there just becomes the sheer volume. So there are tricks we can do to try to decrease the heat problem and maximize the population. But ultimately your population is going to be reduced not by energy, not by food, not by space, but by waste heat. That is going to be what caps how big these cities can get.
In Futurama, they drop giant ice cubes into the ocean.
They do. I've been wanting to do the math, figure out how big that ice cube actually need to be.
We could try that. You know, everybody just like on Christmas, is it? Or when you want it to snow before a school day, everybody flush ice down your toilet.
Oh, man. But yeah, so waste heat is a huge problem. And short of having a giant ice cube we can drop in the ocean, if we even still have oceans, if we haven't paved over them.
Yeah. I mean, that would be awful, but it's probably a reality. But that is such a cool concept to think of, because I feel like it's one that a lot of people, including myself, usually mentally skip over. We're like, oh, food, or space, or the people's natural want to kill each other will all get in the way of this. But at the end of the day, it's us bumping shoulders too close and cooking each other, like how bees do to invaders of their hives.
Oh, yeah, how they cook wasps. Yeah, no, heat, is the thief of all joy. Ultimately, it's what governs everything. I know in our Space War episode, I brought that up as a big killjoy. It's just, it's the same thing with space habitats. The main issue with them is overheating. There's a reason I call the show Entropy Rising. Entropy ultimately decays everything into waste heat, and waste heat becomes a huge problem.
Yes.
I did also read a concept. This one's really far-fetched, but I do like it in theory, especially if you're not using your poles anyways, so they're just kind of empty volume. You could potentially build huge walls, like absolutely massive walls that go all the way up to the top of the atmosphere, pump out the atmosphere from the enclosed volume of those walls. So now you have vacuum coming to almost the surface of the planet, and then build giant radiating towers. That way they can radiate the heat into the vacuum of space without it getting trapped by the atmosphere.
That's actually the best concept so far. If we could get the walls to actually pull a vacuum like that, then man, that would be so cool.
It's kind
and
of
then it would work like a giant, like a radiator, but it's just evacuating that heat into somewhere that is not Earth.
Yeah, out into space. And it's not as crazy as an orbital elevator, because you just need to get to the top of the atmosphere to a reasonable level, but it's still a massive feat of engineering, and I don't think any known materials could handle being that, walls that tall. But it is an option, especially if you have something like carbon nanotubes. Maybe we could do it with that.
Yeah, or if we figure out how to synthesize and mass produce spider silk.
Yeah. Orbital elevators are also nice. I mentioned that if you have an orbital ring connected with orbital elevators, that could also work well, as pump heat into that, let that radiate off the heat.
An orbital ring wouldn't be bad either, but the ring would have to have some way to get constant heat dissipation, like going up into it.
Yeah.
And then people wouldn't really be able to live on the ring.
Well, I mean, you could just fill it with radiators.
I guess that's true. Yeah, and then have all the radiators sit in the atmosphere of space while people live inside.
The lack of atmosphere of space.
Or the lack of atmosphere of space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, no, waste heat, big problem.
I was just thinking about how our name is Entropy Rising, and we do talk about heat a lot.
Yeah, I mean, heat is everything. I didn't pick the name at random. Heat is everything.
Yeah, man, that's crazy.
No, yeah, that ultimately is what governs the flow of our universe. That's what makes everything work.
Right now, we're talking about the heat world of just like an urban ecumenopolis. But what if we were talking about like a factory ecumenopolis or a forge ecumenopolis, like something that was specified for production and not habitability?
Okay. Yeah, no, that could be interesting, especially with Forge Worlds, because ultimately heat is always going to be a problem no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Forge Worlds, I would tend to think that heat, to a certain point, is a benefit. Working in a higher energy environment means it takes less net energy to heat metals up to their melting point. And if you don't care about habitability, or if you're in like 40K, in which case making your planet a hot hellscape is just kind of par for the course, and who cares if people die, then yeah, maybe to a certain extent, waste heat could be a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could. Like, you're forging, you're like, yes, just pump more and more heat into the atmosphere. When the metal shows up, it's already limp.
Yeah, right? Yeah, you basically just, you put a hairdryer on it and it just pushes it across that transition point. Now it's a liquid.
Oh my God.
So yeah, if you have something like a Forge World, it could be a benefit. Now, is that an ecumenopolis is the question? Because I think I have a slightly different definition of ecumenopolis than you do.
Now, the reason why I would say that it is, then, and my vision of it is essentially giant forge hubs all around the planet, but you have to house all the people to essentially work these megastructures that we've built on the planet. Like we're talking thousands of football fields long and across, as forging just like incredible amounts of metal to be able to build urban ecumenopolises somewhere else. Now, it's very hypothetical, but you would have to have sprawling cities to support the amount of people or robots or whatever is needed to maintain and work these places properly. Now, because it is entirely like they would use every speck of ground by either forge or building, even though the buildings might not be very tall, I'd still call that an ecumenopolis.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where you're coming from there. I don't necessarily think in my mind it is, because when I think of ecumenopolis, I specifically think of like urban centers, urban cities. And to me, it sounds like you're describing more of like an industrial park. Granted, an industrial park that takes up an entire planet, but I wouldn't really go to, like my local industrial park and be like, I'm in the city. So
But
I guess I'm caught up on that city definition.
I guess that is fair, but a lot of cities are made up of their industrial parks. Like they're technically considered part of the city.
They're part of it, sure, I guess.
I know. Well, it's because they're ugly.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they
they're
they
ugly.
put them out of the way. But if there's nothing but the ugly, but it's part of a city, is that still the city?
I don't know. I guess I don't actually, funny enough, I don't know if I actually have a working definition of a city. A city is just, you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
I think it's like a certain population, but that doesn't really work when you have a planet sprawling industrial park because it's going to have that population. I don't know. I guess my question is, will this have enough population density to be considered a city? Because I don't think so, really.
Let's say on the middle ground, if the whole world spanning, about New York City is 1.33 trillion,
Mhm.
we could probably expect this to be about 200 billion.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not.
And the only reason why I say that is because the giant forges
Yeah, because that's going to be
where people can't live, and then all of like the moving and logistics areas where people can't live, right? But then in every other inch of space, that will be where people live.
Yeah, so maybe worldwide population density not that crazy, but where there are people, it's quite densely packed. And if you're in like the 40K setting, then they probably are packed in like sardines.
Yeah, I mean, just I'm just trying to think of like, of course, a world like this isn't practical, but it is a hypothetical and something that has been thought of, especially in. I pull a lot of my ideas from Stellaris. And Stellaris, you create these massive forge worlds to fuel your armies or build your other cities. I feel like that would be considered an ecumenopolis, but maybe, I don't know. I don't have an exact definition of a city either.
It's funny. I don't think I realized I didn't have a definition for a city until just now. I'm like, no, I've just kind of always thought, like that's a city, and I know it is.
Something good to have.
Oh my god! But yeah,
It's
no,
fine.
it is interesting to think about whether these other cities would be considered ecumenopolises. Because I typically don't think of Forge World as ecumenopolis. I think of a Forge World as, well, a Forge World, like an industry center. Same thing like agri worlds and other types of specific industrial planets.
Mm-hmm.
But if you consider it one, and maybe if our viewers consider it one, then go for it. I don't think I have a strong enough argument against it either.
That's fair. Now, but what if it was living in an ecumenopolis, but the entire city was made out of Amazon?
Oh my god! So like what?
Shipping, packaging, creating tiny trinkets.
Would be interesting. I've never thought about logistics worlds. I wonder if that could be a thing. Handling the logistics of like a galactic empire.
Now, just because it would be the same thing as the Forge world, right? A lot of it would be hubs and logistic areas, except people live in tall, nice skyscrapers.
Okay. Actually, to follow up on this too, we talked about a forge world, but you could potentially have forge districts within a standard ecumenopolis.
Oh, yeah, of
I mean,
course.
think about your industrial park, but your industrial park's the size of Texas.
Yeah. I mean, you would have to think that probably is how it would be.
Yeah, very possibly.
When you have an actual ecumenopolis, especially one that's sustaining itself and not getting outside help, you'd have to have agricultural districts. You'd have to have logistics hubs, forge areas. And why not just make all of them while you're planning the city in one area so that you can have people efficiently do those jobs?
Yeah. I don't know if you'd have, so I could see agriculture going both ways. I don't know if you necessarily need agricultural districts. You could potentially just have agricultural buildings, because then, why concentrate that? Because then you have to ship it around. Why not just place them throughout the city? That way everyone's pretty close to their farm building. Or you could even dedicate floors of each building to agriculture so that each building has its own self-sustaining farming, and you don't even have to ship it between buildings. But in industry, like forges and all that, there's a reason that those tend to get built on the outskirts of cities, because they produce a lot of noxious gases and they don't look good. So I could see that actually being concentrated and locked away.
Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely be good. The reason why I was thinking about the food is because most people don't just pull like an ear of corn off of the thing and start eating it. It goes to a processing facility and gets turned into something tastier, like Doritos.
That is true. That is true. So food processing might, of course, be done.
So if you could have all the food there and then have it run through the processing facility that's right next to it and then shipped from the processing facility around the planet. It doesn't have to just be one, but I feel like that would be like, because this entire world spanning city, of course, isn't all going to be pre-planned. Honestly, it'll probably just be a homogenized, oh God, we're running out of room. Oh God, oh, we're one city.
Yeah, that's how I see it. That kind of reminds me of we have a megapolis already in North America, the Northeast megapolis, which is essentially the area of space from Boston running down to DC that encompasses Boston, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C.
That's crazy.
But that wasn't planned, right? That's just a bunch of cities were next to each other. And because of urban sprawl, their suburbs all butt up against each other. So, and that's how I think a ecumenopolis is going to happen. I think that's just going to keep going and going and going until you end up with one large city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you start with farmland. Farmland turns into suburbs. Suburbs turn into condos and apartment blocks turn into city buildings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's only a matter of time, really, if we keep populating more and more.
So I definitely think I could see that. And I do like your idea of having agricultural based like buildings, vertical farms next to food processing centers. And I could see a mixed bag. Maybe you have that happening, but then also still have some local production, especially of veggies and stuff that people are eating unprocessed.
Yeah. I mean, it could definitely all be in the same building too. Like the buildings that you were describing earlier were massive. They could have their own processing facility, their own farming facility, their own energy production. Like you were saying, it would be somewhat similar or akin to like a vault from Fallout.
Or it's almost kind of like something like an O'Neill cylinder, just not floating in space, just in a building.
Yeah.
And there are benefits to that, less reliance on others if things go wrong. You can still be connected to other buildings though. So you have the benefit of, okay, your fusion power plant has went down. You can draw energy from your neighboring buildings to support you. But also there's no risk of a disaster leading to the whole city losing power.
Well, then you'd have to think of what a city filled with these buildings would be like. The streets would be like empty.
If you even really had I don't even think you'd really have a street level.
Yeah, you wouldn't really.
I think it's just like, a lot of these buildings would be connected with the buildings next to them at multiple points vertically. Street level, I don't really think is a thing that exists. Maybe all the way at the bottom. I don't think most people would go there. And it could potentially be a dangerous place. That might be where you put your industry. And also, carbon dioxide's heavier than air. So there's a real risk that air quality could be pretty bad as you go further down, especially outside.
Yeah, God, would no longer be outside. It would just be artificial like patios and walkways and parks that are slightly elevated off the ground that span out of the buildings and connect to others. It's all by design. I mean, honestly, it sounds kind of nice.
Yeah. I mean, I think outdoor parks and everything, you could have multiple buildings connected up too. You might have a quote unquote street level where it feels like you are out on the street in New York City, except for it's really just roads that are paved between buildings that are underneath those roads is hundreds and hundreds of maybe even thousands of feet until the next one with artificial light above it. Outside might still be an enclosed space. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. I don't know. That is it. I mean, it sounds dystopian because I'll miss mountains and nature and fresh air, but for these people, I mean, they're like, oh, we're so lucky. We get to go outside.
You could still have that. You could still have nature parks. There's no reason that you have to literally pave over every single square foot. New York City is still a city, even though it has Central Park, right? No one says, oh, you didn't pave over this area. You're not a city anymore. I think it's the same thing for an ecumenopolis. You can still preserve areas of natural parks. You might keep, like Yosemite Natural Park might be a city park now. You might have parks that are the size of small states.
I see. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, so that could still happen. It's just about getting there.
But then how do we get down to it if our ground level is completely composed of carbon dioxide?
Well, the trees will help with that.
Yeah, dude. Those trees are working overtime. But yeah, no, I mean that is a great concept though. That would be great if we could maintain our parks. I mean, Central Park is kind of rinky-dink for what it is, but if we could maintain, like you said, parks that were the size of small states, especially with the amount of people that will be living and wanting to visit there, I think that would be much more feasible and just good for mental health all around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, I don't really have anything else to say about these. Do you?
No.
Thank you all so much for listening. Please join us next week where we are going to be discussing the feasibility of stellar empires, finally tying back into talking about how Trantor could or couldn't be the center of a truly galactic spanning empire and discussing the logistics going behind that. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing and following on your favorite podcast platform of choice. And as always, we will be posting our post-episode discussion where me and Lucas will be talking a little bit more about ourselves for free on our Patreon. So check that out if you're so inclined. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks, guys.